All right. My son was actually a driver, and then my younger son. Whenever your conversation's done, I'll start this class here. All right. Do you hear me, Daniel? Yes? I hope so. Okay. Okay, I guess he probably muted himself.
I do hear you, and I see your face too, which is much.
Yeah, we switched the computer.
Okay.
All right.
Very good.
All right, so we're going to finish up this sheet that began with the Yeshiva movement expands. All right. So before that was the one about Volozhin. We spent a lot of time about Volozhin. This is my cousins here, so take another seat. There are plenty of seats. Yeah. Okay.
Your seat is still available. It's still available, but they have to tell it.
Oh, no, I can see you.
All right.
Yeah, if you sit in the middle seat, you'll be fine.
You still will have the television.
Everyone's getting settled here. Okay, and then we moved after Volozhin, which was closed, unfortunately, because the Russian authorities were interfering with it constantly. So the Nitziv had said that was enough, and he closed the yeshiva, and he passed away the year after. Then we learned about the Mir Yeshiva, which is still exists, and is very active. We learned about Slobodka, all right, which is most of them are around Vilna, most of the yeshivas, but this Slobodka is actually in Kovno, all right. And we learned about some of the key people there. Now, I think we're up to Rodin, right? I don't think I discussed the Chofetz Chaim yet. Okay, so we're doing Rodin.
Right.
Okay, you're all with me? That's on page 3, right? On the thing about the yeshiva expanding. The yeshiva in Rodin, of course, is associated mostly with the Chofetz Chaim. And his real name is Rabbi Yisrael Meir HaKohen Hagen. So if you know anybody whose last name is Hagen, they might be related to the Chofetz Chaim. And his years, they are 1838 to 1933. So he lived a good long life, right? I'm not sure exactly where he came from, but it said he probably lived in somewhere in that vicinity, but then he moved to Rodin, which is again close. So it was in that Vilna area in the year 1869. And there he gathered around him. Obviously, he had made a name for himself. People heard of him. They attended prior lectures, very impressed with him. So we had a group of students who were around him. Hey, you can't do that.
Why?
Because then
They have to see.
right,
Oh, they have to see you.
Yeah.
They're sitting there. Okay. I'm sorry.
No.
I apologize. All
right. Can you see me there, Daniel? All right. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah, it's fine.
You sit in that middle seat, right? That's why I wanted you to sit there. It's better. Okay. As long as you can see.
Yes,
me.
I can see you. It looks fine. Yes.
Okay. Excellent. All right. It's interesting because many of the earlier students they were married men. They weren't like the single guys for whatever reason. They went to other yeshivas. Although it also indicates a certain level of maturity. Also, they were already married men. And again, he became like their patron, their teacher. He was a strong personality, but in a positive, nothing negative about him. He was a very saintly individual. He never spoke a forbidden word. He's famous for being anti-Lashon Hara, so he never would speak against anybody else. He was very humble, and he eventually became the leader of Jewry. In that area. You see, we've mentioned many famous Rabbanim who all come out from this time period. So I can't say that one is greater than the other, but they all excelled in certain areas. And again, he's called a Chofetz Chaim because that was the name of his sefer. And many of the rabbis that we've studied from the medieval period up until now, they are known by their sfara, not necessarily by their name. The sefer, it specifically was devoted to laws and traditions relating to slander and deceit. Again, this is Lashon Hara, and conversation in general. How careful we we need to be when we're speaking, whether even about another individual or just certain things going on in the world, that one has to be cognizant not to dwell on the negative or speak any word that might cast aspersion on somebody else. At the time of his death in 1933, he was 95 years old. He was beloved and respected by all of world Jewry. And he still is, and his firm are studied by so many people. And it's a bit difficult, when it comes to Lashon Hara. Sometimes I think to myself, well, I should just maybe not be with other people. Somehow unfortunately, people just do talk. So I do remember sometimes, I didn't want to act like this holy moly, but I actually had to remove myself from certain conversations because it was weird. And even though I made a comment to them, they still kept on talking. So it was very unpleasant and uncomfortable. Now we're going to learn about another individual, again, who is associated with the Radin Yeshiva. It says in 1904, Rav Naftali Trop, his dates are 1871 to 1928, and he became the Rosh Yeshiva of Radin. Radin grew to over 300 students. Somebody made the comment to me the other day, or he was speaking, that a lot of the yeshivas, I mean, there's so many, that might have had only like 50 guys, learning here. So some of them, so we're focusing on the ones that grew to be several hundred. These were the more prominent yeshivas. It was expanded, unfortunately, because of World War One. That the Germans invaded Russia, at that time, and there was great upheaval, and people were so poor, and there was starvation. Then split into 3 groups, but then was reunited in Radin in 1921. I guess maybe for safety purposes, that's why they divided themselves up and went to other communities. At that point, Radin was part of Poland, and it grew and it prospered. In 1929, Rav Naftali Trop died suddenly at the age of 59. Heart attack. I wish they would give more information, but a lot of the sources that I look at don't go further. And he was succeeded by some people that, whose names I'm familiar with, by Rav Baruch Feivelson and Rav Menachem Mendel Zaks, 1898 to 1974. And Rav Zaks was the mashgiach, right, NYU.
Right. I remember him very well.
Remember him, Joel, my husband Joel, remembers him. And I think it was a hard transition, for some of these Rabbanim were coming from Europe, and now they're, I mean, they saved their lives, but they're now in America, but English is not their primary language, and the students are now English speaking students. So and also in Europe, they were greatly honored, they were distinguished, and here in America, not as much. So it must have hurt them, on some level. He was the son-in-law of Rabbi Yisrael Meir Feivelson. All right, so you see there his dates 1898, 1974, and that's why my husband and my cousin, remember him. Rabbi Feivelson died soon after. Rabbi Zaks now became the head of yeshiva. We're talking about in Europe. I'm just inserted the business about him being in America. So if he was the head of yeshiva, can you imagine, with what respect he was held, and now he's in YU. Rabbi Soloveitchik is the big name, and, so, not so easy. The yeshiva was closed by the communist authorities in 1940. And its students and faculty were later murdered by the Germans in the early 1940s. So, unless they were able to escape, they lost their lives. I mean, either the communists totally took over and they couldn't even function, or literally they were put to death. by the Nazis. So much, I think about it was such a rich world, life. I don't know if you've ever seen the books called A Vanished World by Roman Vizhniak. He was a very famous photographer, and he was in Europe prior to the outbreak of World War II, and he took pictures, all over street life, the boys studied in the Cheder, and you just, it all came to an end. I remember, I don't know if it was one of his pictures or somewhere I saw a photograph is showing a scene with a number of people, and there's a young girl there. And I look at her and I think, oh my God, that's what I look like. You know, it was like an uncanny, feeling. But I guess maybe it's a certain look you had if you came, from that part of the world. But she really, reminded me of myself. Okay, now let's go on to Telz, which again today is also a very vibrant yeshiva. The total population of Telz was under 10,000, fully half of it Jewish. And a lot of the smaller towns did have very large percentages of Jewish people. Unfortunately, they were all put to death. But and I think I mentioned to you in general, 95% of Lithuanian Jewry were killed by the Nazis. And a lot of them were killed, not necessarily in a gas chamber, but, especially the Jews in Vilna, I know they were taken out to the forest, Ponari, and they, where they did these huge pits and they just shot them to death. And sorry to interject this, but I remember reading about this. They didn't wait till they necessarily had really killed the people, but obviously they were shot. They fell into the pit, and then there were like layers of people, but some people were still alive. So even when they put the dirt on top, they said the ground was moving. So,
some people actually got out.
yes, but they had to do it at night when they would detect it.
I know a
Right.
boy that got out of there.
Oh, he was
very
at
young.
part of
He was
that.
on the bottom of the pit.
Oy vey,
And they
yeah.
opened like 7 pits in Ponare. And they shot them, they told them to jump in. And they shot them to make sure that they're shot.
Right.
Not to be on top,
Yeah.
And he was telling us the story how at night he got out and he went to the woods.
Right.
And he
Right.
became a partisan, whatever you call
Right.
it.
Right. If they made
And
it.
that's the
I
way
mean, some people were trying to find refuge
And then he
with
came to Israel.
other people, but they turned them in. I
He
mean,
came to Israel, he had Mishpoch
yeah, well,
in
talk about that, he survived.
Pusat in Yerushalayim, very known family. They were kablanim, they were builders.
Ah,
So they were very known, the family.
Very
And they took him in, he was at
Yeah.
the time 17 years old
um,
when he came out.
wow. Well, thank God that he did survive. I mean, unfortunately, most of them did
The
not,
rest
as you
did
know.
So he
Oh.
gave us all the news
Ah,
about it.
Anyway, so let's learn more now about Telz. Now, this was like its heyday in Europe, so let's learn. And it was considered, and we think 10,000 people in a town, but they said it was considered to be a major city in Lithuania. I guess most of them were one of these smaller shtetls spread all around. And of course, like the nucleus would have been Vilna, which was a very large city, It was closer to Prussia. That's why I told you when I looked up my other side of the family, that they came from Suwalk. So I saw that, right, Suwalk was very close to Vilna province.
Right.
So, and again, that was right on the border where the Pale settlement, and on the other side was Prussia. All right, so they're very close. So the people from there probably wouldn't have known some German as well. Okay, close to Prussia, crossroads between Germany and Western Europe, so it's like a dividing line there, and Russia and Eastern Europe, right on the other side, the eastern side. This yeshiva was founded in 1875. In 1881, Rav Eliezer Gordon, his date's 1841, 1910. He was one of the great students of Volozhin and a disciple of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. So obviously Telz was a Musar yeshiva, was chosen to be the rabbi of Telz. He took responsibility for the yeshiva and assumed his leadership. I told you very often the Rav of the town was also the Rosh Yeshiva, not always, but often. one person held both positions. He recognized the dangers of the Haskalah movement, and he struggled to raise both the yeshiva's level of education and its prestige in the eyes of the community. Telz was the most progressive of all the Lithuanian yeshivas. That's interesting. Would you say Telz is progressive nowadays? Yeah, it's it's a bit more to the right, than some other yeshivas. But in those days, obviously, this was how it was viewed. It had an organized educational philosophy, curriculum, and structure. So at least it wasn't some Hefker belt, it was very well organized. Rabbi Gordon was a great leader, compassionate father to his students, and a tireless worker for the cause of the yeshiva. And I always think how beautiful that is when the Rav had again this close relationships with his students, sort of again became like a father figure to those boys and young men, and even a bit older men, depending. By the way, if you ever look at pictures from let's say the 1920s, 1930s, and it shows you yeshiva boys, they're very modern looking. I mean, they're wearing caps. They're not
because it's Litvish, it's not Hasidic.
I guess so. I look at that. No, because now even in that literature world, as you want to say, they're much more from, they're always dressed, in black, and they have hats on and the beards, but they were clean shaven. A lot, very, very. I remember when I first saw pictures, I was like, so taken aback. Yeah, it was modern. And also, these guys didn't sit and learn all the time. They did go eventually, and they worked. Not nowadays. They think that you should learn for years and years. Call up to those who are really good learners. That they should devote themselves. But there are plenty of guys there, unfortunately, who are not on that level. And by right, I mean, that's a whole to do in Israel now with the army, because they're really focusing. I don't think they're after the guys who are really devoted to learning, but there are a lot of guys there who are so-called officially associated with the yeshivas, but they're not learning even.
They're coffee drinkers.
Yeah, unfortunately. So those are the ones, the government's going after. Okay, let me see, where was I up to? Okay, so again, it was considered a very progressive yeshiva. And this Rav Gordon was a wonderful leader. In 1882, Rav Yosef Leib Bloch, his dates are 1849 to 1930, and he was Rabbi Eliezer's son-in-law in so many of the cases that we discussed. That's often was again. If it wasn't a son, it wasn't a son who was capable enough. Very often it was a son-in-law who then took a prominent position in the yeshiva. He joined the faculty. He became the eventual educational architect of Telz, like its overall vision, what it should be, its forms and classes, divisions in order. He was later joined in the yeshiva's faculty by Rav Shimon Shkop. And I remember, Rav Shkop.
Yes, I knew him and his wife.
Here in the United States, right?
Wow.
But this is the original, so to speak, Rav Shkop. His dates are 1860, 1939, and he was a nephew by marriage to Rav Gordon. A lot of nepotism, but I'm sure they deserve their position. Right, that's true. Right.
In Chicago, I had Mrs. Scott, my case.
Oh, you did? Oh my God! Well, this is where in Eretz Israel?
No, in Chicago.
Oh, here in the U.S. Okay. I remember. I don't know what his relationship, but I remember once I was on a Shabbaton, from my high school, and we were in the Bronx, actually, Pelham. And it was just happened I was put up at the house of this Rav Shkop. And then he found out who my Zeta was, like he was all excited, seeing all the connection. Okay, and he was, again, this particular Rav Shkop, he was one of the leading Talmudic geniuses of Lithuania. Okay. This formidable array of greatness and knowledge and educational leadership made Telz one of the largest and the most popular yeshivas in Lithuania. Now, it could be where I got a lot of this information. It could be that guy who wrote the book. It was a Telz guy, so I'm not sure, but I mean, it does have a reputation as being a very fine yeshiva. In 1910, Rabbi Yosef Leib was succeeded his father as the Rav of Tels and head of the yeshiva. Again, taking over both roles, Rav of the town and the Rosh Yeshiva. He was regal in dress and manners, most forceful in his presentation of ideas and policies, and was a most formidable leader. So he must have had a wonderful persona, this is good actually when you have to deal with government authorities, that you present yourself, properly. He more than anybody else formed and molded the yeshiva, the Tels. In 1920, the yeshiva founded a preparatory, the next part, so interesting. The yeshiva founded a preparatory school for younger students, and they called it the Mechina. This became the prototype for today's secondary school yeshivas. That's so interesting. High schools, the high school level. In 1929, a special kollel for rabbinic students was opened. I guess before there wasn't, or they just all learned in a large group. I'm not sure. I'm not sufficiently aware of this. But the fact that a separate kollel, for students was opened. And in 1926, a teacher seminary was opened. In 1927, a Hebrew gymnasium for girls. I remember I had a very good friend who came from this part of the world. I'm trying to remember the Breslov Tops, maybe where she came from. And she went to a gymnasium, and they learned Hebrew beautifully there. Some of them then, if they were able to get out, moved to Eretz Israel. She unfortunately was not, it was in a concentration camp. And eventually she found her way to America. She actually has an amazing story, because she was married prior to the war, but of course, naturally, in the war they were separated. And when the war was over, you could go to certain centers and they would have lists of survivors.
Right.
And she was there, like looking up, and her husband walked in. Isn't that an amazing thing that they both survived? So, but she could never talk. I loved. I went to her house often, and she would talk about her life prior to 1939, and then she would just sigh. She could never. My mother said one time they asked her to speak. It probably was Amit, when it was Mizrahi in America, about her experiences. And she got up and she just started screaming, and she ran out of the room. That's horrible. Her experiences were. In any case, but you can see how now finally, this is also a time period of the Beis Yaakov movement, that the importance that girls should be well educated. And it became the first school of its type under Orthodox auspices in Lithuania. In 1930, a teacher seminary for young women was established. This network of Jewish education proved to be a model for all Jewish communities, and its influence was felt far beyond Tels itself. And some of these young women who survived, were instrumental in then setting up girls' institutions, they came to America or they went to Eretz Israel. And, because really, I could tell my friend's mother, she went to what she called it the gymnasium, and she was extremely well educated. I told her Hebrew was beautiful, and it wasn't, she did not live in Israel at all. It's just from going.
It was at a very high level.
Yes,
The gymnasium was very high.
Yeah.
It was high school.
It's not a high school, it's more than a high
You
school.
had to
Well,
qualify to
because
get
it was
in, not everybody.
Oh,
went.
really? Oh,
Yeah, not everybody.
Highly educated. You could very easily.
Maybe you had a test, like a
Bechina
Bechina to get into these different
Very
schools.
well versed.
Right. Well, even when I went to Central, I had to take a Bechina. I remember my Hebrew was kacha. But I understood, but I answered in English sometimes because it was too hard for me at that point.
So here's a question. Why did Rodden have to close because of World War One? And Tel seems to have run.
I know.
continuously.
Isn't that interesting? I have no idea. I guess things were very difficult in that particular section, that particular town, and that's why.
Yes,
And
the Lithuanians.
wait, it did say that Rodden closed, because it says,
Germans,
Because
Russians.
right, it says the
Jews
yeshiva was closed by
were
communist
responsible.
authorities in 1940. So obviously it was in that part that was first taken over by Russian troops. And then later the Nazis came in. Well, they invaded and attacked Russia. And then they said the others were right. So it came to an end. It wasn't before World War I. It was the World War II put an end to it. Well, almost all these yeshivas came to an end, and then so they, were later relocated in other countries, and reestablished themselves. Like Tells, obviously. Just a little bit more about Tells. In late 1929, Rav Yosef Leib died. His son was Rav Abraham Yitzchak Bloch. His dates are 1891 to 1941. He succeeded to his father's positions in both as Rav of the city and head of the yeshiva. A large American and Western European contingent joined the student body, and it continued to grow until its destruction during the Second World War. So, when I go more to the 20th century, I'll tell you more about, what happened to the yeshivas and how some of them, were revived and reestablished either in America or in Israel. But, these were all, such well-known yeshivas. And I do know for a fact, that my Zeta, through that organization called Vad Hatzalah, it did save many Rabbanim and yeshiva students. I mean, especially at first when the communists took over, because they were trying to close down all those schools. So they tried to get them out of Lithuania, Russia, whatever it was called at that point. But at a certain point, then when the Nazis came, so then whoever they could save, they tempted it. But that's why, like the Mir Yeshiva, was supported by this Bab Hatzalah when it was in Shanghai. Now we're going to learn about another yeshiva, and you know it now today because it's in Lakewood. But it's the original name. It was first in Slutsk and then in Kotsk. Okay, these are towns, right? Somewhere in Lithuania. It was called Yeshiva on Eitz Chaim, and it was founded in Slutsk, which is a town in Lithuanian Russia. I don't know what they mean by Lithuanian Russia. It maybe was more to the right, more, whatever, in the 1890s. Who was its founder? Its head and founder was Rav Yaakov David Bilovsky. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know because, they don't say the W, so I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce all these things. I wish I could call it my father, but yes, Shamayim, so he can't exactly. His dates are 1845 to 1914. He's called the Ridvaz. Okay, those are from his name, the initials. And again, he was a rabbi of the town. In 1897, Rav Nosson Tzvi Finkel of Slobodka. This is interesting. Now, so obviously was a small yeshiva, but I guess, it started to get a good reputation, but they wanted more students. So this Rav Nosson Tzvi Finkel of the Slobodka yeshiva, which was hundreds of students, sent 14 of his prime students and faculty members to Slutsk to help build and strengthen the yeshiva. One of these newcomers was Rav Isser Zalman Meltzer, in 1870, looked in 1953, and he became the mainstay and leader of the yeshiva. When Rav Bilovsky, I guess, left Slutsk in 1903 to emigrate to America and then eventually to Israel. I should have said it should be R. Rav Meltzer became the rabbi of Slutsk and the official head of the yeshiva. Rav Meltzer built the yeshiva into a major educational force. The First World War and the attendant Bolshevik Revolution caused great disruption of Jewish life in Slutsk. So you talk about Soviet Russia. What happened so the revolution was in 1917, but into the early 1920s, there were battles constantly between the whites and the reds. The whites were the ones who wanted like to bring back like the czarist, regime. And the reds were the communists, and the Jews were stuck. We always blamed for everything. And just in general, throughout Russia at this time, there was great starvation. I was watching a show on a TV, it must have been PBS, how there was somebody from America, I mean, nothing to do with Jews, but who was trying involved to send shipments, of food to Russia to help the people. Literally, they were starving to death. Well, these armies were kept on crisscrossing and was destroying everything. The yeshiva was forced to abandon Slutsk and to reestablish itself in Kelts in Poland. So obviously, it was leaving the Russian area and going more into Poland. It was then under the direction of Rav Aaron Kotler. So you've all heard of him, I presume. 1892, 1962, and he was Rav Meltzer's son-in-law. And I know for sure why Zeta was involved with bringing him to America. By 1939, the yeshiva students in Pletsk numbered 260. Rav Kotler escaped to America in 1941, and he reopened the yeshiva in Lakewood, New Jersey. Named it Beis Shkovoa. And you know that, I mean, I never went to see it, but actually I went with my cousin Daniel and his parents to Lakewood, like when I was in high school. We went to this hotel. Are you ready?
Yeah.
You remember that?
Laurel in the Pines.
Right. And then there were a lot more, the Jews who lived there were more modern type Jews, but this has taken over all of Lakewood and surrounding towns. And I think it has the largest base medrash, I don't know how many thousands of guys, learning this huge base medrash. So go, to Rav Kotler and what he is established. And you see, Dafka, he didn't want to be in a large town. And how we got exactly to Lakewood, I don't know the full story, but but he built it up and out. Although when I was younger, it was still considered, a minor, locale. I mean, I actually had some friends, a friend from Lakewood, but they went to Central or YU, the guys. But now, if you live there, you are not. You're because you're learning, you're associated in some way with the yeshiva, and it's a very frum community. Now let's learn about Navardic, which is also known. I wrote their base Yosef. All right. And this became actually a very large contingent of many yeshivas, but it went under the name of Base Yosef. Okay. One of the most famous of the Musar yeshivas in Lithuania was that of Navardic. Yeshiva became the mother of an entire network of yeshivos scattered throughout Lithuania, both in northern Poland also and in Russia. And again, when it was part of this network, the network is what's called Beis Yosef. The yeshiva was founded by Rav Yosef Yozel Horowitz in 1850, right, to 1920. He was a disciple of Rav Yisrael Salanter. So anybody who had studied under Rav Yisrael Salanter obviously advocated the Musar method, of instruction. He was, what it was is that obviously the general philosophy would have permeated the entire yeshiva, but they would actually devote a certain part of the day to actually studying Musar, and the famous Sfarim from generations past that talked about living an ethical and moral life. He was a strong advocate and practitioner of Musar, and he became the target of many of the opponents of the movement, because there were definitely some yeshivas were very much opposed. Maybe they felt it took time away from learning, they didn't like the idea. The yeshiva was founded in 1896 and soon gained the support of the local community and of its famous Rav, who was Rav Yechiel Michal Epstein. He was a brother-in-law of the Nitziv. Remember the Nitziv, that's Volozhin, think about that, okay? And he was the author of the Aruch HaShulchan, which is very famous, very well-known work. In spite of the then vehement opposition to Musser, and especially to the practices and intensity of Rav Horowitz, the yeshiva grew and prospered. Nevertheless, the struggle did not abate, though this fight between different types of yeshivas. 1908, upon the death of Rav Epstein, the yeshiva was forced to leave the city because there were no people in that town who were opposed to it. It returned, however, in 1909, so just a year later, and by 1912, it was housed in its own newly built school building. Novardok Yeshiva helped found many other yeshivot and incorporated most of them into a unified educational group known as Yeshivos Beis Yosef. So it was part of the Beis Yosef movement. It was following, this Musser way of, an atmosphere. Aside from Rabbi Horowitz, the yeshiva and its affiliates were led by Rav Avram Nachman, who was his son-in-law. The number of major yeshivas of Beis Yosef eventually rose to over 20. Until I started working on this, I didn't know all this. I found it very interesting. They were characterized by intense Torah study, combined with the study and practice of Musar in a public and overt fashion. The students were trained to pursue truth and justice and to be unimpressed by the prevailing social conventions of society. That sounds very fancy. But again, the key was to lead very ethical, moral lives, obviously to care for one's fellow Jew, not just strictly the learning aspect, but, an overall gestalt, of how one should conduct oneself. With the advent of the German army's occupation of Vardik in 1915, the yeshiva was transferred to Hummel, I'm not sure what that is, in Russia. During its stay there, branches of the yeshiva were formed in many Russian towns, including, now you're going to recognize some of these, Kharkov, Zhytomyr, Rostov, Astrakhan, and Lviv. Lviv, is that Lvov? What's a Lviv? I don't know. You also don't know what the heck that is.
That's what I would have guessed, but I don't know.
Okay. The yeshiva also, the two also, so we can close one out, also became a central rallying point for many students of other yeshivas who had fled into Russia due to the ravages of the war. I mean, it was tremendous upheaval in World War I. So, people were on the move. So obviously, even if you perhaps were learning in a different yeshiva, but that one was forced to disband, you could find a home, right, in this one of these Beis Yosef yeshivas. The yeshiva also became following the outbreak of the Russian Revolution in 1917 and the attendant Civil War. I told you there was a huge battle going on for years between what we call the whites, which were the people who favored, like a czarist regime, and the Reds, and red were the communists. And it damaged the Beis Yosef movement severely. The communists persecuted these yeshivot and their students cruelly and relentlessly. Obviously, they're totally opposed to religion, and certainly didn't like Jews in any case. By 1920, it's ironic, and so many of the leaders of the Russian Revolution were Jews. But whatever. Like that's Karl Marx's thing, religion is the opium of the people. That if you take it, makes you forget everything else. By 1920, most of the yeshivas in Russia were forcibly shut down, and the students of the yeshivas of Novardok attempted to escape to Poland. Rav Horowitz died in an epidemic in Kiev. I still think of it as Kiev, they pronounce it differently nowadays. In 1920, Rav Yosef reestablished the yeshiva in Bialystok, in Mezerich, in Poland. Eventually, large yeshivas of Beis Yosef existed in Warsaw and Pinsk as well. So it was really a very substantial, movement. But again, it certainly no longer functioning in Russia. The government was totally opposed. I mean, obviously, it was opposed to the church also. It wasn't just the Jewish institutions. Kol hakavod to Chabad. I remember thinking, growing up, that there's no longer religion in Russia. So that any Jews there were identified as communists. That, they didn't identify, they didn't practice any Jewish life. And I remember I was in Israel, my year in Israel. I went to Chabad. What's that town? Where they live in? Oh my gosh. Any case, and there I met some people who had actually managed somehow to escape, Russia, and but they told me how they were managed to retain some level of observance living somehow. Chabad, got to these people. So really, call Chabad.
Yeah, people were studying in Asia.
Yeah, it's like amazing. Because again, until I met these,
actually,
I never thought that there was anything going on, and that, no Jews were able to practice, their religion. Okay. The network of yeshivas and schools. Could you turn off the phone? That would be nice. Just turn it off. Oh, super.
But in Israel, they don't give
The network of yeshivas and schools expanded once again during the decades between the two world wars. So there's a certain level of revival, right? And finally encompassed over 8 different schools, numbering 4,000 students. That's amazing. I never realized this about Nevada. The Second World War, though, it destroyed the issue. That was the end, and its affiliates. Most students were either killed by the Nazis or were exiled to Siberia by the Russians, and many of them couldn't survive it. Very harsh conditions, in Siberia. And if they did, they eventually obviously left Siberia. It was so difficult to live there. And they died due to malnutrition and the harsh elements. Miraculously, Rav Yafen and a handful of students escaped and reestablished the yeshiva in New York, plus small branches in Israel as well. Are you familiar with this yeshiva in New York? I don't know about it at all. I don't. I'll ask my husband if he knows anything more about Nevada.
They have in New York.
What?
They have in New York the yeshiva in Nevada.
Right. Yeah, maybe
I think in Borough Park.
Well, I was just going to say it's probably like Borough Park. That's what it sounds like, but I had lived in Borough Park for 1 year when I went to graduate school, and then it was just transitioning then to the Hasidim started moving in. Now they're like totally overtaken it. And I hate to go to Borough Park because you can never find a parking spot, and they don't just double park, they triple park.
And they don't care how they drive, they're terrible.
So I do not like going there one iota.
Me neither.
Oh my gosh. So Flatbush is bad enough for me, but I can somewhat tolerate it. Also, my daughter's like fearless driver there, and she always manages to fit the car into a spot that I could not possibly attempt. All right. Now I'm going to actually hand out to you just a few great rabbonim. We're probably not even going to have time to get into this very much. But the thing about the anti-Semitism, for sure, we'll get till next week. So let me just start handing these out. Do you have it? It's called 19th Century Torah Masters Continued. We had done this before. We talked about the Malbim and other great figures. Now I'm just going to add the names. I'm going to give it to you. You don't have it. I don't think it was ever. Well, they could have it, but we're not doing that today. So, but they could certainly, no problem. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay, well, I'll get to it then next week. But I figured as long as we're learning about yeshiva, let's just. Oh, good. Okay. Wait, you have the thing in the Torah Masters? Let me see. No. That's, I'm getting that. That will be due next week. Okay. All right. So, some of these names you may be familiar with, some not. But apparently, they were considered great ones in Europe. Okay, so first one here, listed here says Rabbi Yosef Shaul Nathanson, and his dates are 1810 to 1875. And it says he studied for many years with great diligence in the home of his father. Remember, before the yeshivas were established, I told you you would learn in people's homes, or maybe in a base medrash. But that's the unique thing about the yeshivas in the 19th century, have these very large, places of learning were established. Okay, so he learned in the home of his father, who was Rav Aaron Levi Ettinger, who was a great Talmud Chacham and an extremely wealthy individual. That always helps. My husband always says, he should have married a wealthy girl. No, good, sorry. He married a rabbi's daughter, so.
The rabbi's daughter always marries a wealthy man.
Not me.
That's a ruling.
But, obviously, I would imagine if the, if the father, deemed this person a worthy match for his daughter. So, but the money helps, right? So that's always
But
good.
in Vita predominant.
Oh, really? Okay.
Wealthy girls who could do it, sits and learn.
Rav Yosef Shaul's study partner was his brother-in-law, right? It's a whole family, Rav Mordechai Zeb Ettinger, and I've definitely heard of the name Ettinger. They studied together for many years and collaborated in the joint authorship of many important Sfarim. Okay, we'll just finish up with him because I see what the time is. In 1857, Rav Yosef Shaul was appointed Rav of Lemberg, where he remained for 18 years until his death in 1875. He served as the Rav without remuneration. Well, obviously, he didn't need the money, yes, for he was independently wealthy. That's always good. So that's why people want to complain, or you can totally ignore them, because you're not in fear that they're going to take your livelihood away from you. His wife conducted a business, and she made it possible for him to devote all his time to Torah study. Have to keep the house, have a gazillion children, and they also have to go to work. Call up a vote for
This
these
is the
women.
shit to do.
Right. Rav Yosef Shaul gained fame as an outstanding scholar and posek. Halachic questions came to him from all parts of the world. These are called the Shailot and Teshuvot, questions and answers. His collection of responsa, it's called Shoel Umeshiv, is recognized as an outstanding work of definitive, halacha. Rav Yosef Shaul was also known for his benevolence and for his support of the needy. He established a food kitchen in Lemberg, and he often ate there with the poor to elevate their spirit. It seemed like he was a very fine person. In addition, he only gave his approbation, that's the money that he received for his farm, that he had personally. Oh no, that's when you write a recommendation. That's what it's referred to, right? So if other people, would send their works to him and have him look it over, so now they're telling you, well, he only would give his approval to Sfarim that he had personally examined thoroughly. Very often you can see Sfarim come out and there's a list of different people who, are recommending it, right, endorsing it. I don't know how carefully they actually have looked at them, but they're saying in this case, he certainly did. So call look about. We'll do this Rav Tzvi Hirsch Kalisher. He's pretty well known. And we'll do that next week. So we'll finish this up. There's several brought in that too. And then I'm going to shift slightly and just talk about anti-Semitism in general, but I'm going to include what was happening then also in Germany and Austria-Hungary. We'll do France, probably next year. We have the Dreyfus trial. There's so much. It's amazing. Within this 1 century, so many changes occurred. I think it's just, there were so many movements. Again, maybe before we begin class next time, I'll just discuss these various movements, and they're all will get intertwined. Obviously, this is where the Jews are living, and it's going to impact. And again, the yeshiva world is still going to continue no matter what, but there are going to be all sorts of other things, that are going to be affecting Jews, and why some will pull away from traditional Judaism.
This is the one.
Very good. Then you have a busy fast if you're fasting and a Purim Sameach. And they're the only Masorot Tovot from Eretz Yisrael.
But I want to give you one story from Eretz Israel, what Israelis are. I heard this morning a group of people went to Bulgaria to ski. That was group of people that got wounded in the war, some with them, without.
These are Israelis, you're saying. right?
Israelis. They went on the El Al plane, people in first class. Got up with them.
Oh, how beautiful.
And they moved to the back. It's
Oh, my God.
it could happen.
Right.
It's
Amazing.
when I heard it,
Amazing.
I
Yeah, but they were on a plane.
Yeah.
And then people realized that they were soldiers who had been wounded.
wondered.
So people who were sitting in first class, they were Israelis too. Gave them-
Better chance to
Ah,
see to be able to.
All right, Daniel, be well. I'll be in touch with you.
Thank
I'm
Okay,
gonna end it now. Okay.
very
Bye-bye.
good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
have a
okay.
wonderful, happy Purim.
Happy
Bye-bye.
Purim.
Thanks.
Okay.